Do you make these up as you go along, or are you just recounting something from the past?
These stories are a mixture of recounting what happened in the past and inserting information that I learned typically at a later date.
That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Oof.
Oof.
Hmm?
Alright, so the one story that I can think of that would come to the forefront of my mind is the story of what we essentially called Arradin's Fall, which was a 12-hour session of a system that at the time was referred to as Times Are Rough the RPG and was later officially named to Martyrs of the Dark World. As one might expect, it's a homebrew setting, and if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point. Okay. This in particular story begins with meeting a new player who I'd had no previous interaction with, who went by the name of Debo. He was introduced to me as, quote unquote, a bit of a troll baby, but otherwise fairly reliable, and the dungeon master, who goes by Brian in another Discord that I fairly often frequent, who was the dungeon master, basically vouched for him in that he and him had both played on Neverwinter Nights servers before. The old Wizards of the Coast game, not the newer MMO thing that came out. I have no idea what that's about. There was an initial setup period where we both decided what we were going to play, and he basically told us it's going to be kind of a more investigation-y kind of story. So I went up and I basically made a rogue, or at least a roguish archetype. Devo, when offered the chance to play a mage in the setting, which mages in Martyrs of the Dark World are not a common thing. In fact, to play a mage in the system, ordinarily one would have to roll on a d10 and roll a 10 to actually have a chance of playing that. There are other quote-unquote magical classes like your traditional priest, or empowered Templars, or actual paladins, but those are less rare, but still very rare. The role was done away with so that Debo could play his character, and what ended up happening was that my character, who was named Goffrey Demayer, was effectively friends with this elven magician known as Arradin. Being that the story's name encapsulates essentially to Arradin's fall, I'm going to warn you right now, it doesn't have a happy ending. That said, continuing on, we didn't get onto the greatest foot when almost at the very start of the game, Debo went and kind of fucked everything up. So let me set the scene. My character, who is a rogue, is effectively set up as the spy master for a rich accretion merchant. In fact, a merchant lord, I believe, of a town called Lakeshore. The name Lakeshore is somewhat ironic because it is a coastal village, and before anybody asks, why would the village be named Lakeshore if it is a coastal village? The background of that turned out to be the guy who named it was very drunk. And that's where that ends. Arradin essentially was coasting up until this point of the game's start by being a magical advisor. And I'm trying to actually think up. I don't remember if I have any notes on this particular beginning of this session, but if I pulled it up, I might be able to find it. Regardless, at the very start of the campaign, we effectively begin at dinner with the Lord of the House effectively grilling both of us on anything that we would have happened to have found. My character is somewhat evasive and basically remarks that he was too busy focusing on the posterior of a woman he was courting to really notice anything of importance, but he was sure everything was fine. Debo then has Arradin proceed to make my character look like an ass by effectively just coming out of left field with, yeah, so there's like a mage smuggling ring happening in the town. And almost immediately, as I realize this makes my character look incompetent, I just whirl on Arradin and I'm just immediately like, I never heard about this. The fuck are you talking about? Because to give you an idea, mages aren't well liked in this setting. And they're not well liked for very important reasons. Does anybody have any questions about why mages aren't particularly well liked?
I was just going to say, what are the reasons?
Yeah.
Well, the laymen typically see mages as most people would have viewed witches in, well, the medieval times. And so much as even speaking about performing witchcraft tended to have very awful things happen to you. Now imagine that stuff is actually real now. People can actually be, burnt by a fireball just absolutely at random, or some random guy can just pick up a scroll or something and just cast whatever heinous nonsense. And additionally, and this is where mages get most of their reputation, is the disaster system. Because what magic effectively is in the setting is it is a select group of mutant level individuals who effectively rip out the protective fabric of reality to essentially use this entropic force, which is chaotic in nature, to bend to their whim at any given moment, and essentially create small or large tears in reality in which every heinous thing in every other dimension that's trying to break into that particular world is trying to get through. And if you're making holes in it, well, it makes it significantly easier, and a whole lot of bad stuff happens if the holes get big enough. That's to say nothing of all the dumb shit that magicians can do, which most laymen typically, and this has become somewhat a running joke in Mars of the Dark World, most of the time the subject of magic is brought up, they'll just look at the magician or the person who's assumed to be a magician or an empowered priest of any description or whatever, and they'll just say, don't turn me into a frog. Just don't do any of your dumb wiggler shit. Because they don't know
worse than that. I'm gonna turn you into a toad.
Exactly. It's just like, you don't know what the fuck they're gonna do, and like, what are all the stories you hear about magicians? Like them doing stupid shit, like turning people into frogs or blowing up cities, or a very common example, which is the past history of a place known as the Imperium Divinatus, where a single magician with an artifact nearly effectively wiped an entire continent off the face of the earth. The effects of which are still felt to that very day because there's a giant area known as the Scar. It is referred to as the Scars because she created so many random anomalous bullshit that they effectively had to make a giant wall around the place to keep anything from coming out. But that's neither here nor there. Arradin, having thoroughly made my character look like a fool, is then told, alright, well, it looks like the both of you have some work to do. And it's like, alright. And then I pull Arradin aside. I was like, okay, so what the hell's the deal? Where's this mage smuggling ring that you heard about? And he tells me, he's like, oh, well, I was kind of drunk at the time, and I don't really remember much, and I'm just sitting there going like, you motherfucker, you just made me look like a complete ass off of something that you barely remember. So here's what we're gonna do about this. We're gonna go to the location that you had this supposed epiphany with mages being smuggled in. We're gonna go there, we're gonna find nothing, and you're gonna go up to the Lord, and you're gonna clear my name, and not make me look like a gigantic asshole. Oh yes, and there's one additional small smidgen detail that I feel like should be mentioned. Arradin was an elf. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm going to be like the arbiter of how elves should be played, but I don't feel like elves should be played as human with pointy ear. And that'll be sequestered for later if anybody has any more questions. He also has the unfortunate disposition of being a mutant elf. Not in the sense that he's a magician, but in the sense that his left arm is a tentacle.
What?
His left arm has been replaced at some point due to either magical heinous interference or some other chicanery with a squid tentacle. As you might imagine, this is another thing that would get people stoned or burnt at the stake or just murdered in the street for any number of reasons, so he keeps it hidden away. And to kind of get back at him and just was like, so we're basically back on even ground, is I set him up with one of the, I believe one of the scullery maids of the, what's the word I'm looking for? The fortified manor, there it is. One of the scullery maids. I basically hook him up with one of the scullery maids, and then she tries to wrap her arm around him because he's an elf, and of course elves are good-looking, and so when she goes to wrap her arm around him, it's like, all of a sudden she wraps the tentacle. And then he basically just talks her down and is like, no, I just have a condition, don't worry about it. This never comes up again, but I thought it was funny. So we wake up the next morning because obviously we just gotten down to dinner and then we have this conversation. Arradin, for whatever the fuck reason, decides, no, I don't really want to do any of this stuff that the weird rogue spy master is telling me. And so I kind of want to go like, and just like do my own thing. And I'm just going to go like, this is an RPG. Please tell me you're not just trying to tell me you're fucking me over and then just breaking off Ricky. And so essentially we have to resort to having a dice roll off. My character is very persuasive. Arradin is neither persuasive nor particularly mentally fortuitous, which is how charisma versus charisma or will is determined in Mars of the Dark World. You can either stonewall people or try pleading your case with one or two stats, effectively. I beat him soundly, and then we go. We go to the place in question. Some guy has a altercation with Arradin very briefly. He's very drunk and just wanders by. He's like, hey, wait a minute. You're an elf. I fucking hate those dagger ears. And then he just kind of passes out in front of us to give us, some flavor of how Arradin might be treated by less upstanding people. And it so happens that we get there just as Arradin finds someone who supposedly has something that actually is to do with this quote-unquote smuggling ring. It may not have anything to do with mages, but there's certainly a smuggling ring going on, apparently. We happen upon a table of cards being played by, I think, 4-ish individuals. One of whom is apparently a notorious cheat, who proceeds to cheat directly in front of us, fast talk his way into getting the whole pot into his sack, and then vacating the premises. Shortly thereafter, the other patrons realize that they've been had, and they go out after us. And the reason they're going after us is because we went after him. Because he's the only one that apparently in Arradin's drunken stupor last night he could remember. Or whenever I had this drunken stupor in question. So we corner him in an alley and we start asking him questions, but then the thugs get on our heels. Unfortunately, our attempts to hide him, effectively, don't pan out and there's an altercation. Apparently during this altercation, where Arradin gets his head stoved in, that is to say he receives a concussion in the course of the fight, this con artist had effectively managed to pry open a door that was locked and then sequester himself inside, the building in question being a not currently open tavern type establishment that had yet to have actually, I believe, physically opened in the street ever. So there were like chairs on tables, sacks just sequestered every here and where the works effectively, but there's like no light sources or anything. We walk into this building to try and get him. The point is made fairly obvious to us that, well, it's incredibly dark in here. If he wanted to ambush us, he'd have a very easy time of doing it. And so my character effectively lies in wait and props up a chair because he doesn't realize there's another way out of the building. Arradin goes to get the guards in, I can only describe as the most heinous and stupid way possible. He walks up to the nearest regiment of guards that he can find, I believe a squad of 5, and he says, "Hey, the spy master wants me to, get you guys to help him out." As I'm sure you've realized, referring to my character not by name but as the Spy Master is not very good for me. So what ends up happening is they jatch and jotch around for them for about 2 minutes before they actually manage to show up onto the scene. In which case, they show up, the guy's not there, I'm not there, the guards get fed up and they leave. He lets them go, and then he walks into the establishment and he finds me there. He asks me what I'm doing. He's like, "I don't know if he's in here. He could be hiding somewhere. I don't want to get stabbed." And then Arradin looks at me because elves and Mars of the Dark World have low light vision, and I'm playing a human who does not. I spend the next 20 minutes in and out of character effectively having the most strange debate imaginable of, "I cannot see. What do you mean you cannot see? I cannot physically see. It is dark." Continue this for the next 20 minutes. So Arradin, eventually, confused and befuddled, begins helping me search around the area, because I didn't bring a light source with me. Neither did he, for obvious reasons. And, eventually, we find the other exit that the bandit supposedly made himself out. And while we were kind of annoyed that, well, he'd probably gotten away long gone by now, my character starts going for the door, and Arradin fails to inform me of the bear trap that he'd put just under a bunch of sacks that were right in front of the door.
Fuck.
Managing to critically succeed on what is effectively a dexterity save in Martyrs of the Dark World, effectively just, I believe... Yeah, I think I just rolled raw dex or something, but I exploded a dice twice to make this work. Brian then describes how my character has his foot just barely brush against the teeth of the bear trap that had been put on these sacks, and then jostle away before anything can happen. But because it's dark, I'm not pretending that I know what the hell I'm accidentally stepping on, other than it has jagged teeth. So I stick my mace in it, and it breaks my mace.
No.
Oh well, I say, it's just a piece of wood with a metal stamp on it. Big freaking deal. Bright side, I now have a bear trap.
Did you turn it into a bear trap on a stick?
No. That would
Why?
be dumb.
Think about it. It's just like having a fucking mace, but the mace bites things.
There's nothing subtle about carrying around effectively carrying a mace that is a bear trap on a stick.
Well, you don't need to be subtle with that. It's a fear tactic. Like, if they get hit by that, they're not only getting stabbed, but they're getting bit, you know?
My character doesn't do fear, he does criminal connections.
Oh, well, never mind. My bad.
Anyway, in the previous altercation with the 3 gentlemen who'd been following after the man who had effectively stolen their money, apparently we'd murdered one of them. Or at least knocked him out to the point where he effectively had his brain rattled and he died in the street. The local gang that I didn't know about at the time didn't take too well to this. But we wouldn't learn that till later. So, just in sense to make the best of a bad situation, because Arradin had kind of had a concussion to that point, my character offered to lead Arradin to the apothecary and make sure he didn't stumble over himself. Afterward began the most hilarious series of Brian rolling heinous bullshit as if he'd made a deal with his dice to become blessed by Mephisto, in which some random schmucks managed to roll like 30 plus on a 10-sided die multiple times to follow us. This is the first instance, and they follow us to the apothecary. I deposited Arradin there. I promised the apothecary payment by... what was his name? Honston Kirk? Yeah. I promised payment from Honston Kirk, and then I effectively leave to start figuring out what the hell's going on with the situation. As, you know, a man with criminal connections is wont to do. I get about 15 minutes out of character to just kind of sit there mulling about the situation before apparently the guys who'd managed to follow us began accosting the apothecary.
Oh.
These are some very, very fast criminals, I'll have you know. And I wasn't expecting stuff to escalate this quickly. So while I'm not there, effectively what transpires is this poor apothecary is just absolutely bullied for quite a significant period of time, and are essentially trying to get him to press gang him into letting him into the back room where Arradin was. Arradin, hearing most, if not all of this, I believe, decides, you know what, now's the good time to use all of my magic bullshit. So what ends up happening is for the next hour or so, I should also preface this session took over, I believe, 12 hours.
Fuck!
Yeah, we went from, I believe, like 7 or 8 p.m. to, like, the equivalent in a.m. It was a long one.
Jesus Christ.
So, for the next hour or so, Arradin gets his spells, because that wasn't a thing, because magic was still very, very beta in the system, and it still is. They've mostly been, like, whittled down into just being character archetypes now, with, like, you know, stuff like divinationist or illusionist or chronomancer, stuff like that, but most of that isn't even done in the current system. So Brian has to effectively come up with creative little spells for Arradin to know. And because Arradin is an elf, he has the distinct pleasure of having two disciplines in this current state of Martyrs of the Dark World. That being chronomancy and abjuration. An astute RPG player or a person who knows anything about magic might realize that, wait a minute, those two things aren't very good at killing people. And you'd be right. However, in Martyrs of the Dark World, most mages have befuddled their way into making something to the effect of what is effectively an attack spell. What Arradin had was his chronomancy spell Time Lash, I believe it was called. And what Time Lash did is it did a fairly substantial amount of magic damage. In addition, anybody he hit with it aged for 10 years. Or a die result, I forget which. Either way, you didn't want to be hit by it. So he begins chanting this spell from behind the curtain. Everyone's like, what the hell is that noise? He bursts forth from the curtain, and then he blasts some random guy back over the apothecary's counter. All the other thugs, completely not expecting a figure of myth to effectively start trying to kill them, just absolutely book it. The guy who's hit by Time Lash not only survives, he books it not for the door, but for the apothecary's wooden shutters. Screaming every obscenity and word to denote a magician that he can, like, imagine, like, warlock, mage, magician, witch. He breaks through the shutters and begins just sprinting out into the streets. This is what my character hears. And thinking, oh shit, my friend is in trouble. I should probably go help. And so I turn back around and make quite possibly the worst decision of the entire campaign. To go help my friend. Anyway. Arradin is sequestered away back into the back room of the apothecary, who, though very shocked that he's apparently treating a magician, and very pissed that his shutters are now broken, promises to just add it to the tab. My character walks in. If I remember correctly, I have a bit of a goof session with the apothecary where effectively I relate to him that one of the local tavern owners is actually, and this is true, thinking about becoming a carpenter. So I could probably get him a good deal on getting his shutters fixed. And he relates to me that he's thankful and that when he gets to that, give him the name of so-and-so and this and such, and I go about my day assured that nothing bad is happening, and I go once again to find out what's going on. It is at this point that another player enters the game. Andy. Andy, who is playing quite possibly, ironically, the most hated character in existence post his playtime. I believe his name was Gerard Delavane. Now, the thing that made Gerard Delavane hated is, just to be upfront with this, is not necessarily the way that he was played. It's that he didn't do anything. But the reason that we were sore that this character didn't do anything was because he effectively rolled a talent that is effectively a 1 in 100 chance, because how the system works is very early on in character creation in Mars of the Dark World, you roll for your quirks, or you also have the option of rolling for mutations. However, if you get a very specific quote-unquote quirk, it effectively means that you have no quirk, which is a prerequisite for getting what is known, or was known then, as protagonist. What protagonist did, because it was later phased out, because it just felt really bad to not, quote-unquote, have or be a protagonist, was that it gave you incredible stat boosts and allowed you to achieve what were known as heroic stats. They were all very dumb, I assure you. However, if I remember correctly, Gerard's heroic stat was fight. Fight effectively be, as you might imagine, the stat that determines your combat experience and relative skill level with most forms of combat. He was one of the greatest fighters on the planet, bar none. He never fought anybody.
But
I'm sure you have a question, Ganyeta. Go ahead.
But how does he know he's the greatest fighter ever if he's never fought anybody?
Because his number is really big and he was trained by an incredibly, incredibly good fighter. Anyway. So Gerard enters the scene. He effectively comes upon a commotion happening in front of the apothecary after my character had left, because, of course, some random guy had busted out of the apothecary's shutters, screaming to high heaven about everything that you wouldn't want to be in your town imaginable. The guards in front of the establishment were effectively trying to diffuse the situation and effectively saying all the things you might imagine guards say. He's like, there's no mages in the town, don't be ridiculous, those don't even exist. Stuff like that. And after asking a series of questions, Gerard makes his way inside and begins talking with the apothecary. My character, who'd taken note of the incredibly well-armed and armored man taking an interest in going in and doing something about mages, magicians, or whatever paraphernalia, has a think about it and is like, if I leave this alone, Arradin might be killed by this guy. So I double back again. I waltz in, I introduce myself to Gerard, and effectively try to fast talk my way out of getting Arradin. Wait, no. I'm having a discrepancy with how I remember. This was a very long session. Hold on. Okay, now I remember. So what ends up happening is, despite my character trying to fast talk past Gerard, he just barely manages to eke out a win for stonewalling me, and basically just effectively trying to say, is like, I don't trust you going in there. And my character very pointedly looks at him and is like, and I'm supposed to trust you, mister? I'm going to waltz in there with chainmail and a giant crossbow and all this other nonsense? And he's like, that's fair. And then I ask if he wants... I basically... I ask him if he wants to be introduced to not De La Ponce. Oh, I keep forgetting this guy's name. Anyway, I basically offer to introduce him to the Lord, which he hesitantly accepts, and he waltzes up, and they effectively have a very amicable chat. That is to say that Andy effectively removes himself from the story for the better part of 3 or 4 hours, and we don't hear from the Lord past that point, except for after he borderline demotes me and Arradin for letting some random schmuck get away. We would later learn that this was one of many terrible things that had been happening in the town at the time that we weren't privy to. But what effectively ended up happening is that he's told us, like, you're both having suspended pay for the next 2 weeks, and you're only allowed to eat hardtack and jerky. Additionally, you're to sleep in the stables. He wasn't happy. And I was getting rather cross at this point because I'd effectively just introduced him to somebody who he had plans to talk with at length. So we go our separate ways. Afterwards, Arradin posits that he wants to go and visit the library. I tell him, you have a concussion. You should probably go and, like, talk to the apothecary again. And so I sequester him away over there again. I go out... I'm sorry, that was our plan. What ended up happening was that while we were sleeping in the stables, the gang from the previous altercation managed to track us down to not Ponce's. I should probably mention this character. De La Ponce was effectively the town guard captain. He was not a fan of my character, and he was almost as little of a fan of Arradin. This was pre-character generation. He just didn't like either of our characters. So my character had very limited interactions with this character. However, he was very good at his job. And it was only because of his intervention that we probably didn't have our throats slit, several times during the adventure. Unfortunately, he wasn't exactly watching the stables very closely. So what ended up happening was that the gang had piled up a bunch of barrels and whatnot in front of the doors and set the barn on fire. As you can imagine, my character and Arradin, fearing for our lives, didn't wish to get burnt to death. However, Arradin, in a somewhat misguided attempt to prevent us from dying from this fire, opted not to really do anything about getting us out of the fire, and for whatever reason decided, I'm going to make a small area of effect spell that protects us from heat or fire damage or something along those lines. Which, even if it was successful, which it was, didn't necessarily prevent the barn from falling on our heads, nor did he voice that he would do this. So, after he casts it, my character just kind of bulldozes his way out of his little area of effect spell and starts trying to bust open the door. You know, as you might do in a panic scenario.
Open the door.
Now, here's where that whole disaster system starts coming in. Because you see, despite Abjuration being one of the quote-unquote safer magics, to afford what he wanted to do with this magic spell, he had to do something which at the time was referred to as gambling with fate. What gambling with fate did was effectively, you would roll a die to see if anything strange would happen as a result of casting this spell, which was likely outside of your purview of your experience level as a magician, because there were, of course, experience levels. As a novice magician, he didn't have quite the amount of chutzpah he needed to cast this small area of effect spell of protection, and he gambled with fate to do it. And what ended up happening was a terrible, terrible thing. Because you see, Arradin had a very specific quirk, in addition to his mutation. He had a phobia. A phobia specifically of portals. Now, he stated that his phobia was mostly a joke as a result of Geralt of Rivia just hating portals because he had recently played The Witcher 3. Unfortunately, the result that he got for this gamble with fate was 2 consecutive ones on a d10. That is to say, the first roll was to determine whether or not the creature or whatever that would potentially find this breach in reality would be benevolent or malevolent, and the second one was to determine whether or not it was incredulously powerful or was incredulously weak. As you might expect, with both results being 1, that was bad. And in enters a small inky portal from which we see a strange red-skinned horned figure. And I'm gonna see if I can actually manage to find a picture of him for your benefit.
Are we talking like an insectoid race kind of red wasp thing you're talking about?
Oh no, he's a demon.
Oh, okay. It's just he has that kind of insect appearance to him, you mean?
Not really insect, he doesn't have any eyes.
Oh, well,
If either of you have any questions, now might be a good time if I'm gonna get you this reference picture.
I'm still making a face at the "he has no eyes" part.
Oh yes, he is a very roundish, scaly, kind of red complexion. He has no eyes, but he has very big, rounded teeth. Not really rounded teeth, but very pointy teeth that jut out from his very crooked smile. Unfortunately, I can't seem to be able to find his reference picture, so I'll basically have to go off of description. So, this creature, who's referred to as Malleus Bale, or at least that's what we out of character know him as, is effectively a very crimson, eyeless creature with a gaping, crooked smile. He looks at Arradin, who unfortunately fails his incredibly high will save to not be completely encapsulated by fear, because, as stated before, he has a phobia of portals. One of which he's just effectively opened and allowed this whatever it was to kind of go out into the world.
I can show you the world, shining, shimmering splendor. Hold on for 1 sec here. I'm gonna go grab a drink here real quick.
Sure.
Maybe some almonds. Oh, you know what? If you wouldn't mind me sharing this quick aside before you resume your story, Alex.
Go ahead.
So, I found out this past week I had an appointment with a nutritionist because of working on self-improvement and stuff. I have discovered, disappointingly, since June of last year, I have, according to definition, been starving myself. Like,
That's bad.
Yeah. Like, I'm talking 1,000 calorie difference starvation. And I've been a little bit upset about it because the calorie amounts I was recommended by my NCOs were wrong. And I listened to them thinking that they would have the, how should I put it? The resident experts, per se. I now realize that they were so fucking wrong because everything I had been recommended, nutrition-wise, had been incorrect. What I should be eating, how much I should be eating, when. Every single thing was wrong, according to the nutritionist. So, on a rest day, as they call it, I should be eating around 2,000 calories at my current age and weight. On a non-rest day, I had been eating about 1,500 calories. So I wasn't even eating enough for a rest day. On an actual day, like an actual day where you're doing stuff based on level of activity and everything, the max amount of calories I could have been eating were 2,800, with the recommended amount being around 2,600. I now realize why I always felt hungry. Anyways,
Okay.
that's rant done.
Yeah, I don't think I could imagine only eating 1,500 calories a day.
You want to know what that looks like?
No.
So, one of the I think it's 1 liter containers of apple juice is 440 calories, which means drinking one of those in a day is 1/3 of my calorie intake. Think about that for a sec. 1 foot-long Subway sandwich is usually 1,000 calories, which means, thinking about it in that way, obviously that's not exactly what I was always eating, but typically speaking, calorie intake wise, I would have the equivalent of 1 Subway sandwich and a 1 liter thing of apple juice per day.
Stop it.
Yeah, trust me, I have stopped it, and I've proceeded to start restocking my thing with all varieties of food. I'm just waiting for my stove to get fixed so I can get a couple other things to cook.
Excellent.
Why in the fuck is it so hard to open this can of almonds?
Because you were starving yourself.
Evidently, yes. Anyways, that's the end of my rant, though, so whenever you're wanting to continue and everything.
No problem. So, my character, who is most decidedly not a magically inclined individual, is completely and utterly ignorant of the cosmic horror effectively smiling and thanking the magician who allowed him to enter the world behind me, and just kind of fucks off. He disappears from the portal, and then there's just an inkly black hole in reality, just for all intents and purposes there to see. And eventually, Arradin comes out of his stupor. He pulls out this little bauble that supposedly his previous master had told him to immediately crush and effectively sprinkle against any significantly dangerous holes that appear in reality as fast as physically possible. And he did so. Perhaps a bit late for that whole scenario not to play out and Malleus Bale to come into the world, but you know what? He was kind of terrified at the time. You can understand. And eventually, after getting over his newfound heinous fear of whatever that was, he eventually decides, maybe it'd be a good idea if I helped out the human after about like three or four more turns of him having his hair turn white from this experience, and then begins helping me open the doors. And then ushering the horses out. Because, it's like, we're not assholes, we're gonna try saving the horses. I'm trying to remember. I remember... Ah, yeah. I should also probably preface this, because I remember Daniel being in this particular scene, so I'll go back to him. So Daniel at one point enters the game, probably at the absolute worst possible moment. Arradin's mid-concussion, sleeping away in the apothecary. My character's trying to go do stuff. De La Ponce actually has a physical interaction with my character because apparently the Lord's son has finally come home from abroad. His son, as it turns out, is Daniel's character. And for whatever reason, Daniel just had to play another monk. Which Brian was just ever so glad to accommodate him and have him explore the consequences of such a strange lifestyle in a Western society. Now, here's where the problems with Daniel's character comes in. Not only does his entire opening procession cause great issues for my character, who's trying to go out and do stuff, but because my character has supposedly, quote-unquote, failed, according to both DuPonce and the Lord, to do something inherently basic, perhaps I should just do this one thing. And as Brian kind of pointed it out to me, I probably could have just told DuPonce to fuck off because we didn't particularly like each other at the time. But I acquiesced because I wanted something to go right in that particular day, and I didn't think things could go bad quite that quickly. Oh, the joys of youth. Anyway, Daniel's effectively homecoming procession takes the better part of the next few hours, effectively robbing my character of the rest of the day, while Debo's character is trying to rest up. And this is where my conflicting memory finally rejoins the pieces, where I effectively have to secret away Debo's character away from the apothecary because we had important stuff to be doing at the Lord's Manor, because he kind of expected to see us at that point. We were then subsequently dealt with, and then for whatever reason, because one of Daniel's quirks, which happened to have been follower, he chose to interpret as, I'm just gonna literally follow everyone around for no particular reason, because I that's my character. To give some more perspective, the follower flaw is effectively, you're not really cut out to lead. It does not literally translate to, I must follow people like a lost puppy constantly. But, oh well. He also has an incredibly inherently dangerous flaw that he decided not to get rid of, that will come up later, I assure you. But to say nothing else, Daniel's character decides that he wishes to follow us. I argue the sensible and logical argument of, I should probably put more perspective in here. So Daniel shows up after coming from a place called Sheen, which effectively is, I believe, Fantasy China, which is where he learned to do all his monk stuff. He comes home wearing a dress, effectively, to, Western sensibilities. Basically like a gi or a robe or something. He is subsequently changed into appropriate apparel for the heir of the lord of the house. That is to say, rather foppish clothes with lots of frills and padded shoulders and everything you would expect of nice, good-looking clothing. Which, marks you as someone wealthy and important and easily kidnappable. My character brings this up in conversation. Daniel merely states that, well, yes, that's all well and good, but my father imparted both of you to protect me. This was not wrong. However, he was also ignoring my argument that I'm pretty sure that if it gets out at any point, that I allowed you to follow me after giving you a directive to not follow me into incredibly seedy and dangerous areas where you will be noticed and possibly kidnapped or murdered or who knows what, I will be hanged.
Oof.
Get good. Typical things a street rat worries about when he's going to try and talk with seedy underworld types. Anyway, Daniel ignores this, says he puts on a big smile, and he's like, well, I'm gonna come with you anyway.
What could happen?
Well,
A jump cut to you in the guillotine, like begging for your life type shit.
oh, I wish. What ends up happening, as I remember it, is we meander our way down to a local bar. My character starts trying to talk with some people and schmooze around. Daniel gets into effectively a no-holds-barred brawling competition. He does fairly well, but he is the penultimate champion as he loses to someone who is clearly his superior and is also, I believe, a Constantian individual. Constantia effectively being Fantasy Spain. No one said that every martial arts ever had to come from Fantasy China. But anyway, they have a nice little talk and a gab, and meanwhile my character's trying to apply information, and then he learns... I believe this also takes place while Arradin is indisposed and is at the apothecary. Yes. Excuse me.
You good?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Are you sure about that?
Telling these stories just gets my throat dry a lot. Don't worry about it.
Get some water.
I got you there. Anyway. What ends up happening is my character finds one of his contacts, a woman named Matho, who my character was sweet on. I basically just randomly decided this. I was like, oh shit, she's surrounded by like 6 guys who are all basically like obviously grilling her for information. So I think about, what am I going to do about this? I look at the guy who Daniel had effectively just gotten done being trounced by, effectively. He never, I think, physically struck Daniel, but it was very clear that he was martially superior because he would stop his blows at just the right moment. That kind of stuff. And so he starts trying to chat up this guy. Unfortunately, this individual does not have the common tongue as his first language, which causes a language barrier issue. And after about like a minute and a half of this conversation, I'm sitting there going like, holy shit, I just realized I've been talking to this guy for half a minute and a half. I was effectively trying to get this guy to like help me like deal with these guys, but that didn't pan out as I nosed my way back into the tavern and noticed that all of those individuals were gone. I made my way outside, and then Brian made it a point to tell me that the only thing that I see that's of any real particular note is a sewer grate. And I'm like, why the hell would my character make the connection that this sewer grate goes anywhere important? So I'm like, who could help me with this? Arradin could help me with this. And so I dragged Daniel's ass all the way back either to the apothecary or the Lord's Manor or wherever he was just napping up. Yeah, I think it was the Lord's Manor, actually. I dragged him from the apothecary to the Lord's Manor. And I essentially began begging for his help. Like, almost literally physically in and out of character, begging his character for help. And this whole time, both the characters and the people who were playing the characters were effectively mocking me. Which I didn't care for one bit, mind you. And so what effectively ended up happening was like, okay, well, my character, incensed and completely and utterly done with this nonsense, is going to physically drag Arradin to the district in question. And I beat him. Not physically beat him, as in I assaulted him, but I beat him in, like, the obvious subsequent strength check. And Daniel, being a weirdo, decides to follow us. I basically relate to Arradin the nature of my woes, and he basically tells me, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. And he starts casting a spell in the middle of the bar. To which my character immediately pipes up, it's just like, not here! Not here! You fucking idiot! Thankfully, the only guy who seemed to have noticed or gave any semblance of a fuck about what was happening around him was some random individual who caught sight or heard Arradin doing all this weird wiggler nonsense and booked it out of the tavern. I immediately gave chase, as did Daniel. Arradin, meanwhile, was following the effectively breadcrumb trail, I believe, in the magical ether or whatever the nonsense was happening, to go where the woman that I described had gone. I believe the spell's named Crumbs of Fate. No, that's something that my current wizard uses. What was it? Anyway, it was a chromancy spell, and it just showed him like a past echo of where people had been and where they essentially ended up within like the period of an hour or so, so it was like well within the time limit. So he starts following that breadcrumb trail. I literally physically chase down this guy, and we basically start interrogating him. He's like, you're here to kill me, aren't you? You're one of so-and-so's boys. He's like, what? What are you talking about? You don't work for him? He's like, oh, thank God, no. And effectively, I end up telling this guy, is like, you gonna get with a knife? What? No? Well, you might want to learn, because weird stuff is happening in this city. You know what? That was almost prophetic.
That sounds so much like a threat, though. Like, you gotta be honest. Like, you any good with a knife? What?
This is like after a couple minutes of conversation where basically we go back and forth and just basically ascertain whether or not each individual is dangerous to whatever the fuck, because I didn't know who this guy was. He could have been working for like those gangsters that've been doing dumb shit behind our backs and just like, almost burned us alive in the next scene. But anyway, I basically warned the guys like, yeah, dumb shit's happening, you might want to start learning. And I leave him alone. It is at this point that Arradin finds us, walks up to us and says, oh, hello, Gottfried. By the way, she's dead.
What?
Yep, he had ended up following her trail, and what ended up happening, apparently, was that they'd, I think, gone down to either the sewer system, or they went down to the wharf, and then they threw Metho, after she was presumably bound by something, into the ocean. He was like, huh, okay, that happened, and then he walked back, and he basically directly walked up, and he told my character, yeah, she's dead. I want to remind you, this is an elf saying these things, not pointy-eared human, just an elf. Again, I'm not gonna tell anybody how to play an elf, but I would imagine someone who has several hundred years of life under their belt to go about things with a bit more decorum. Anyway, My character, completely and utterly done with the events of that day, goes to retire into the barn. And then I basically send a private message to Brian, basically stating that, alright, I'm going to go to sleep, or I'm going to pretend to go to sleep, and then I'm going to basically consider whether or not to kill Arradin. Because effectively, how we began that game was fairly buddy-buddy friends. He very quickly, almost at the very beginning of the game, started the very heinous process of trying to end my character's life. Outing me to random guards. Making me look like an asshole in front of the Lord. Getting his ass scrunched in. Getting into an hours-long argument in his place because he couldn't fathom that I couldn't see in the dark. And all these things just started adding up, and to the point where my character's like, this guy's trying to kill me. He's trying to fucking kill me. And ironically enough, me not killing him in that instance in the barn would end up being the greatest mistake of that campaign. Because as stated afterwards, Malleus Bale came into the world. And he's doing all sorts of fun things, I'm assuming. And so we get back to the post-barn burning fiasco. Daniel, for whatever reason, wanting to be the center of attention, which I can understand. I believe myself to suffer a very lesser version of that, of wanting to be the center of attention. I guess. Just decides, I'm gonna drop down from like this 3rd-story window and just start running toward the burning barn. And of course, being a monk, he does dumb monk shit and is fine. And he starts waltzing over. He doesn't really contribute to this scene, but I felt like it important to introduce him into the story to where you realize how little help he's being. It is at this point that DuPont's walks up and effectively starts interrogating both of our characters. It's like, what happened to the barn? Why is it on fire? And Arradin just fucking loses it. He starts going off about how there's this heinous, dark abomination that's going about, and he's gonna end the entirety of the city and do all this heinous shit. And DuPont just absolutely decks him in the face. It is at this point that Debo, Arradin's player, basically says, Brian, yes, Debo. Can I be unconscious? Yes, you may. And so laid out, DuPont looks at me and tells me not to lie to him. And I'm like, I ain't fucking lie to him. This is fucking stupid. So, me and the DuPont's second in command effectively haul Arradin up on shoulders and drag him back to the apothecary to sleep off his second of what I believe to be 3 concussions in the game.
Oof.
We take him to the apothecary. We promise him payment. We have a bit of a gab. And then I have a short conversation with the second, or the lieutenant. I forget what his name was, unfortunately. I don't have my notes on hand at the moment. And then I start thinking about how I'm going to start dealing with this nonsense. And it's at this point, after my character's sitting there on a stump, alone because Daniel had been sequestered back to bed by DuPont's, about just what the fuck is he going to do about all this nonsense. Gerard comes out of the Lord's chambers. And he looks at me. And he says, what are you doing around here? I have my character reach for his water skin, take a deep, deep swig, and I say, let me tell you about the last fucking few hours of my life. And I basically recount to him all the dumb shit that had previously happened. After that, as I recall, my character goes out on his own because Gerard went to go to bed essentially and starts basically trying to mill away the night hours with what little time he has. I have a talk with a few NPCs that aren't particularly important, and one who's apparently a legendary figure in the setting, but doesn't really have any bearing on the story, so I'll kind of mull that over and effectively go on back home, as it were. The next day starts. We collect Arradin from the apothecary, I believe. Daniel is still following me around.
Daniel sounds kind of weird.
He is incredulously weird. He has very strange problem-solving skills. That is to say, I don't think he has any.
Oof,
Yeah.
That sucks.
But regardless, for whatever reason, he decided that it was going to be a good idea to just constantly follow around my character for whatever reason. And so we go about trying to investigate all this weird shit that's happening, because in the time that it took for the barn to burn down and effectively the night to pass, apparently a whole bunch of the guards in the local area had been getting jumped. Fittingly enough, by the gang members that we had pissed off the organization of. Now, I will preface this by saying, us killing one guy did not start a gang war. This had been long in the works, and my character was effectively meant to find out what was happening. Which was constantly sidetracked by my character having something of a conscience. Unfortunately.
Oof.
And Gerard, and Daniel, and etc., etc. Anyway. We finally set about to begin investigating. For the third time in a row, Brian has this random group that's been following us effectively with 30 plus rolls on a D10 for the third time. However, like the fucking legend that my character is, he once again critically succeeds on a notice roll and notices that there's guys on the rooftops following around them. Fittingly enough, right back in the section where that con artist was, I call them out and start breaking in to that one tavern that the guide led us on a wild goose chase beforehand. Unfortunately, apparently Brian's bandits are the most competent bandits in existence. Or at least this organized criminal organization was. Because they managed to surround us and effectively have an entire, 20-ish guys just cut us off from the alleyway that we'd entered into. And then there were a bunch of guys on the rooftops pointing crossbows at us and effectively saying, alright, how do you want this to go? And so, after about a round or two of Daniel, well, I'm not going to blame Daniel for doing the optimal thing here and not being shot by a crossbow, because he didn't realize that they weren't trying to shoot him in particular. And catching a bolt in midair, which is fairly conspicuous. But effectively what ends up happening is, mid-lockpick, my character holds up his hand and everyone surrenders. Arradin gets a bolt in the shoulder. And then we're effectively led away in full-body manacles. We are led into the most heinous-sounding full bandit lair that I've ever heard of, which is effectively a series of kill tunnels set up in this sewer system of Lakeshore, complete with its own dungeon, as we would later learn, its own treasure hoard, and an entire base of operations. We're all put into the same cell and manacled against the wall. I'm trying to remember exactly how this goes. Okay. And lo and behold, who's the guy who they send to interrogate us but the apothecary?
And let me guess, the apothecary recognizes you guys or something?
Oh, he recognizes us, but they're not referring to him by his name, whereas an apothecary, they refer to him as the Moonlight Barber.
Oh. I feel like that could be kind of bad.
Yeah, you see, they refer to him as the Moonlight Barber because of his particular accoutrement of throat slitting, which is a barber's razor.
Ah, yeah, that'd be not good.
Yeah, apparently we had effectively accelerated what was meant to be a somewhat long process of the apothecary just going completely insane and just becoming a serial killer.
Oh.
Which is why he's referred to as the Moonlight Barber. Or the Barber for short by some of the thugs.
I blame Daniel.
Same. We are introduced to the Barber effectively by him effectively, I want to say interrogating, but he kind of just goes in and slits the throat of the guy who we initially found trying to con 3 random guys and started all this nonsense. Or at least what felt like started all this nonsense. And I'm just sitting in there in my cell, listening to this guy effectively give this guy a very effectual shave. And then at one point, the shave obviously turns malicious and says, "It's time for a clean shave," and slits his throat.
Oh.
My character, who's in like one of the adjoining cells, is like, "Thank you."
Wait, whose throat got slit now?
So you remember that con artist individual I brought up at the start of this tale, the guy who basically fleeced 3 guys out of their money, ran, and then like got away from us?
Oh, yeah, those guys.
Yeah, that's the guy.
Oh.
Yeah, they slit his throat.
Nice.
So the barber walks up to us and effectively starts interrogating us. He looks at my character, and then he looks at Daniel, and then he looks at Arradin, and he says, "So, which one of you is the one with the quick fingers?" And my character just looks at Daniel's like, "What, him?" It is at this point that he opens the cell, and then he begins, how do you describe this? Alright. He takes out what are referred to as scissor clamps. And he effectively scissor clamps off the fingers of his left hand. That is to say, Daniel's character's left hand, which I can only assume would be incredibly painful, but at least he did them the service of stitching him up afterward, because, he's an apothecary. Unfortunately, because my character was a sassmonger, at one point during this whole situation, my character had to get a little bit of sass edgewise. It's like, well, this isn't really helping me out here, isn't it? As he's, interrogating me and effectively, like, having a back and forth. Apparently, he didn't care for this, as he then reaches for his razor, he opens my character's mouth and saws off half of his tongue.
Ah. This is a little bit of a fucked up campaign, ain't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it gets worse.
I would imagine it does.
Oh, it does. Anyway. So, after this happens, my character, in a feat of heroism that is only thoroughly stuffed because I feel like Brian didn't want this to go in a particular way, or because he felt that I didn't roll high enough for some malarkey, basically, because I had a just-in-case lockpick, I managed to, while manacled to the wall with my hands up, wedge this picklock out of my character's back pocket, put it on my shoe, and then kick it up to my hand. And apparently, despite asking for a lockpicking check, asks me for another one. Mind you, to do this, because we were manacled, I had to heroically succeed at this check. And then he asks for another one. I was like, what the fuck do you mean another one? I was like, yeah, you rolled your agility check, not a lockpick. He's like, that was my lockpicking check. Unfortunately, the next result is unfortunately not a heroic result of any way, shape, or form. I rolled fairly averagely, which, unfortunately, for the DCs that he throws at us most of the time for dumb shit like this, is not gonna cut it. So I drop the pick or some shit, and we just sit there stewing in our own muck for a while. We are then brought, or my character and Daniel's character are brought to be interrogated by, I guess, either the head or the stand-in of the head of this organization. Me and Daniel's character effectively just fucking go livid on each other for the bullshit that apparently we have inflicted on each other for the past day and a half, effectively. And reacting with some amusement, he basically says, alright, well, you were going to be of some use there, Gottfried, until, well, apparently the barber got to you. Because, as I put it so colloquially in our out-of-character chat, it was like, Debo, I've gone from being the spy master to the spy master! He cut out half of my tongue. I don't speak effectively after that.
Yeah,
he didn't even stitch me up.
Point.
Anyway.
Oh, so it wasn't so much a spy master as much as it was a...
I could still speak, it's just, it was very difficult to understand my character sometimes.
Yeah, because you'd have both a lisp, and if you didn't sew it up, you'd be gargling your own blood at the same time, like...
Oh yeah, it was crusting over after a while.
Ugh, don't make me think about crusting over on the tongue. That sounds fucking disgusting.
Oh, it is. And I had to live through every moment of it. And worse.
Oof.
I'll get to that. So what ends up happening is, for whatever reason, the Moonlight Barber, otherwise known as the Apothecary. In fact, I believe the Moonlight Barber was currently in a disguise, so we didn't know that he was the Apothecary. Breaks us out. Now you might be wondering why he did this. Me too! But for whatever reason, he takes my character and Debo's character and just lets us go in the middle of a sewer.
What?
After revealing to us that he was in fact the Apothecary. And then he kind of looks at my characters like, you did me a good turn, Gottfried. And this is about all I'm about to muster up for you. You have about this many minutes before they catch you. Oh my god, I forgot about the homeless guy. Hold on. That poor fuck. So, for whatever reason, Arradin gets a bee in his bonnet, and after the Moonlight Barber effectively leaves us for effectively the rest of the campaign, except for mentions, Arradin decides, I'm gonna go back in there and I'm gonna deal with them. And I'm like, where the fuck are you going? He doesn't talk to me.
No, you mean, where the fuck are you going?
I'm not gonna roleplay having half of my tongue in here. I already had to do it once. That was bullshit.
Yeah.
And so, my character, completely unincensed to stop Arradin's bizarre, now self-imposed, apparently suicide mission, I turn around and try finding my way to the sewer. And I happen upon the unfortunate cadaver of Homeless Guy. Now, I completely glossed over Homeless Guy. That is to say, I don't even think I mentioned Homeless Guy. After initially setting out to go and start effectively, like, investigating this nonsense that Arradin had set us out upon because my character effectively was outed for not knowing that there was a magician smuggling ring in the city. I wanted a little bit extra assurance and at least one extra body to throw at potential bullshit that would come our way. So I effectively started chatting up a homeless man, who it turns out was actually a veteran of one of the conflicts of the setting. I chatted him up for a while, I gave him a couple pieces of silver, and I asked him for a story and generally treated him like a human being. Hell, I think I even took him to the local cobbler and I got him a pair of shoes. And despite having what is referred to, I think, as the hack, which effectively is like the common cold, I believe, in the universe.
The hack? Well, I guess that makes sense. It's like a hacking cough, I guess. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, people refer to it like as the hack, at least in that colloquial area. Effectively, despite having the hack, he's like, Spoon, yeah, he's gonna hug you. It's like, oh, come on.
He's gonna give you the hack.
Thanks.
To be honest, in that kind of context, it almost sounds like an STD, don't it?
Kinda. But anyway, after effectively befriending this homeless man and treating him like a human being and getting something he probably desperately needed, I basically said, hey, you mind just like watching my back for a little bit? And, you know, he started telling us about his war stories, and then the incident with the guy happened, and he ended up helping us out in that fight against, what's his name? Against the three thugs. So it was effectively like 1 versus 1 for the whole fight. Unfortunately, the old man got knocked out, and we sent him to the apothecary as well with Arradin, I believe. Unfortunately, the thugs got wind of this, and in the downtime of not being there, the thugs were bullying the apothecary, forcing him to treat them for free, and apparently they at some point got their hands on the old man, and, well, that's where I found him, in the sewer with the knife that I'd lent him stuck in his back.
That's kind of sad.
Yep. It's at this point that I take the knife, I kind of wipe off its rust and blood and all that other good stuff you like to hear about, and then I put it away and I effectively brandished it for the rest of the game. Or at least for as long as my character was alive. So I make my way out. I go to the Ponce. I tell him effectively what happened. He asked me where Arradin is. I told him, I have no idea. He apparently got it in his head that he was going to do some heinous bullshit and went off on a suicide mission. And it's at this point that Arradin showed up. And then I effectively asked him, where the hell did you come from? And then he pointed in the direction of the stables. Interlude. While my character's little trek through the sewers was happening, Debo effectively was, for whatever reason, meandering his way through what was effectively an enemy base filled with hostile combatants, which, you know, you do by yourself all the time as a squishy magician who's wounded and likely has septic wounds because he's been traveling with a bolt wound in a sewer. Anyway, he somehow manages to find their little treasure hoard, and by little I mean it looks like a giant pile of silver and gold and goodness knows what else, including most of our possessions, if not all of our possessions. I'm trying to remember. Was this before or after Arradin's Master? I think this is after, but I'll get into that. And what ends up happening is that Malleus Bale, or at least what we assume to be Malleus Bale, shows up. Though not in necessarily the physical sense, but in the sense that he starts as kind of casually chatting to Arradin and knocks out all the torches, makes his infiltration a little bit easier, but he still manages to get caught by some guy with a hand crossbow, and then when the thing that's effectively tying Malleus Bale, that is to say Arradin, is effectively under threat, he teleports him to the stables. And then he just apparently got it up in his head that he was gonna go and do the exact same thing that I did. So another bit of a preface. I believe the reason that Arradin was actually able to recover from his first and second concussion was actually that his teacher showed up. And to give you an idea of how rare it is to see an actual other elf in this setting, I can think of a singular other instance where I could tell that there was another elf there. And he was basically a side character. So having an elf there is a big deal, especially an elf magician. He effectively patches him up, and I do not know how Debo interpreted this conversation, which effectively was this elf going, "Alright, listen, Arradin. We are several hundred years removed from these filthy humans. You must always act with decorum and grace, as you will always likely know more than they will ever get to learn." What Debo interpreted this as was, humans are shit, and humans are shit. I wish I was hyperboling right now, but effectively what happened was, after I effectively dropped him off at a brothel, which is where this little healing session took place, he was completely and utterly adamant about not working together with my character, which is also another reason why we were effectively yelling at each other when the whole interrogation happened. And despite my character's attempts to effectively, I want to say sue for peace, but just like mend ties, really, by cooking him something like rather delicious that he probably wouldn't have eaten in a while, because my character actually had the skill in like the culinary arts, as like an aside. I made him something as a peace offering, and for whatever reason, he was very adamant that that I, the player, probably know that he didn't much care for my character for like the rest of the campaign. Where I believe at one of the times where we were pausing the session, I was like, "Yeah, I want to look out on Spoon's character as effectively washing off the filth from the sewer as I'm sitting in my lofty apartment with all the money that I stole in my high-rise, thinking, damn, humans suck." Just like shit like that. Very passive-aggressive nonsense. But I dealt with it. So, what ends up happening is that Daniel, somehow, I believe as a result of, I guess, the direct intervention of Malleus Bale opening his door, manages to escape. Or not even, I don't even think he opened his door. I think he just kind of like trapeze artist his way through like their bars and went through their sewer system. Unfortunately, here's where things take a strange turn. My character is pissed. Arradin's character is pissed. Daniel is still being weird. But he's still the Lord's son, so he's invited into the castle. What ends up happening at this point, I believe we'll sit with the rest of the group for the rest of our days, because Gerard once again makes his presence known. And effectively telling him the rest of what happened and all this nonsense that happened is like, yeah, we were basically like ganged up on by like 20 guys, and they basically took us prisoner and they cut off half of my tongue. For whatever reason. And I still don't know the reason why. And funnily enough, neither is Andy, the guy playing Gerard. Does this as he looks directly at my character and is like, "You have no honor, Gottfried," and just starts going off on my character and is like, "I don't have to fucking take this shit from you." Or as I would probably said in this set in games, like, "I don't have to take this shit from you." And I start making my way, like, to leave the fucking service of the Lord, which most people don't do because it's a rather cushy job. You know, this is like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna do this? Are you gonna go be a farmer? But unless, as I'm leaving, dramatically timed, the Lord's chamber doors open, and I'm invited to speak, potentially for like the final time with the Lord, to discuss the terms of the agreement of our, whatnot. I then go through a series of questions of, how far away is the portcullis from here? Basically, like, could I make a run for the gate? Now, because of Arradin's phobia by this point, and he's still effectively kind of zonked out and just kind of lying on one of the benches nearby, I had actually made an example earlier of Arradin, I believe. Basically, it's like, what? You don't believe me, Gerard? Like, here, watch this. It's like, I look at Arradin, I say, the teeth. And because one of the most prominent things that fixed in Arradin's mind was the teeth, as he would repeatedly shout in strange, almost syphilitic insanity tear shouting, he would just yell, "The teeth! The teeth!" And then he ran directly face first into the portcullis, which is where his third concussion came in. But nonetheless, Arradin is collected. Me, Gerard, Daniel, basically everyone in the game, finally basically meets up for the first time in his chambers, and Daniel drops a bomb. How this little meeting effectively goes is, I keep wanting to say DuPont's, but it's not DuPont's. Dunkirk, there it is. Hans Dunkirk, the Lord of the Manor, effectively just says, like, we appear to be at an impasse. For whatever reason, despite what I thought was very generous employment, now people want to leave. And now I hear a tale that my magical advisor is going off the deep end, and my new buddy Gerard over here is telling me all this other stuff. What do you have to say for yourself? And here's where Daniel drops the bomb. Basically out of nowhere, he's like, "Father, I do not wish to succeed you." Excuse me, what? And then Daniel basically goes into tirade where he basically, like, weirdly flatly lays out, like, I'm clearly not fit to lead the next generation of the Dunkirks. You would likely be better fit with doing this or that. Effectively just saying, look, lol, I disowned myself, idiot. And it's at this point, funnily enough, the only reason my character doesn't just straight route and run from the city at the first opportunity, because my character thought his days were going bad. Now here's this guy effectively having his only remaining son, because his other son effectively was killed in a horse riding accident, basically saying, I don't wish to succeed you or your title. And my character's just sitting there like, God damn, I thought my day was bad. So, we all resolve to get on the trail and get back to things that matter and get the campaign done. Sort of. Dunkirk, to his credit, without missing a beat, effectively disowns Daniel on the spot and says, alright, you're no longer allowed in my house. He is stripped of his garments and then effectively told to go and change back into his strange Sheenic gear or whatever he was wearing beforehand, and then told to vacate the premises.
Fun.
Yep. Gerard, my character, and Arradin are effectively tasked with trying to salvage what it could be saved of this now gang war that's brewing up in the city. And immediately, Gerard just starts taking exception with my character, calling him useless, ineffectual, and basically saying how, now that I'm here, things are actually going to start getting done. And we're going to start with getting you patched up and properly clothed. So what he does is he takes us out to go buy cloaks, and he pays for that, which he obviously has a salary to do, because to give you an idea, me and Arradin started out with a gold piece per week salary, which was again shut or closed off to us for the next like 2 weeks. So this is like neither here nor there. Gerard, however, after being received by the Lord and having a nice amicable chat, gets a 5 gold a week salary.
Oh yeah, so he's probably got a lot more.
I don't even know if he's been paid yet, but he probably started with more money than we did anyway. Ooh. That said, we buy cloaks, which is like a silver piece each or whatever, because silver actually matters in Mars of the Dark World, unlike Dungeons and Dragons, which is just like, is it Is it in gold pieces? No? Then it might as well not be on the list. I don't know what the deal with that is. But... And then he takes us to another apothecary. As there's not just one, as this is a city, effectively. And then he has us get in line. As my character is being treated, effectively, everyone else is kind of in the room milling about and, like, saying their piece. The apothecary basically just starts going through the motions and is being kind of an asshole. Basically just is like, alright, now then, you know, obviously my character having, like, dried blood around his mouth and whatnot from the previous altercation. He's like, say now, please. Yes, that looks infected. We'll need to cut that out. And my character is just sitting there, shitting. He's like, he needs to what? There's I don't know about this, Jenny. And effectively what happens next is, like, the next couple minutes of my character effectively being coaxed into a head brace.
Oof.
And then the apothecary is like, alright, well, I need to brace you up here. And there's, like, I'm starting to look, my character's probably starting to look around for ways out of this building because this looks incredibly painful just from the brace. But he's talked into staying. After he's nice and braced up, the apothecary goes for his knife, which he then, I believe, puts under a flame. And he starts working on my character with no anesthetic, to the point where my character, I think Brian actually brings this up out of character, he's like, Spoon, yeah. Would it be unreasonable to assume that your character pisses himself? It's like, no, I'd probably say that having a burning knife cutting off infected pieces of my skin would probably estimate a level of degree of pain where my character would piss himself. It was like, yeah, fair. And then my character effectively is worked on to the point where he passes out. After my character is done being treated, patched up nice and clean, the apothecary is paid, and then Gerard, and even out of character, we could never find out why he did this. He couldn't remember himself. We asked. He asks the apothecary, he's like, do you have anything that could wake him up? Oh, yes. Well, I have these smelling salts here, see? But I would not recommend using them fairly often. They're actually fairly poisonous. He purchases them, and then he immediately puts them underneath my nose, he crushes them, and makes me wake up. Then Brian effectively looks at me from across the internet. He says, okay, yeah, Spoon, you have just been woken up after your incredibly painful surgery. He's like, you're sure right. Okay, the first thing I do is I slap my hands over my mouth. And that was the next 2 minutes. We never got an adequate explanation of why he did it. So, what ended up happening canonically and in legend lore, effectively out of character, is that everyone just thought that Gerard was an asshole.
Oof. Yeah.
This trend is continued not just because he fucked with my character, or called my character a honorless asshole, or basically said that my character was worthless and did nothing right, but because of effectively what happens after another character is introduced, which I'll get to. So, my character is propped up, made to leave, and then we're all going about, and for whatever reason, it's already about nighttime. So Gerard says, okay, the two of you, let me think about how to phrase this. So what ends up happening is that the bad moon starts rising in the sky. The bad moon being, like, of course, like the titular full moon. My character, not wanting the metagame, just says, yeah, sure, I'll go to whatever fucking tavern or inn or whatever, because I'm not allowed to sleep in the manor anyway. And I go into the same place as Daniel. Arradin finally finally, because he'd been basically whinging and whining about this at the start of the campaign, decides that he wants to go to the library in the fortified manor, and Gerard wishes to join him, which totally wasn't metagamed because everyone already knew that Daniel was a werewolf.
What?
Yeah, so Daniel kind of gave it the ghost and basically said that at one point it was like, everybody already knows I'm a werewolf. And then I, of course, not knowing that Daniel was a werewolf, says, we didn't, but thanks for the spoiler, Daniel. He's like, oh shit, okay. Fuck. So, what ends up happening next is Brian is nice enough to describe my character as effectively receiving a nice, long, quote-unquote conversation session with one of the local tavern wenches, who listens to my sob story and pretends to understand what I'm saying through my leftover tongue. And then, well, it's the full moon, so Daniel decides it's time to change.
Wow, okay.
And by decides, I mean he is forced to change because werewolf becoming a lycanthrope is not something you control in any setting that matters. So he becomes a giant hulking, steel-bending Hulk beast who has incredibly bullshit stats, most of them heroic, and effectively starts savaging the entire tavern that we were staying in, or whatever. I can't even remember if it was a brothel, or if it was a tavern, or if it was an inn. I think it was an inn that offered sexual services, but that's neither here nor there. Pandemonium is happening. The woman next to me gets up and is like, what is happening? And then Brian plays out this nice scene where effectively Daniel's werewolf rips off the door along with its hinges, and effectively I have seconds to react, and I'm like, Gerard's an asshole. Daniel is a gigantic asshole. Arradin's an asshole.
I'm surrounded by assholes.
No, here's the thing. The woman who just slept with me is probably the closest thing my character has seen to a friend. I am true neutral, but that doesn't make me a gigantic fucking asshole. So my character's final moments are effectively trying to shove the whore out of the window.
In order to save her life.
I tried.
Did you succeed?
Well, here's what ends up happening. I basically asked Brian, he's like, Brian, yeah. Could I get at least one final quip in? Yeah, sure. I was like, oh, you smell like wet dog! And then he bifurcates me. My character dies, just barely managing to shove the whore through the window. Unfortunately, her self-preservation kicks in as she doesn't wish to be plunged to having a broken leg or whatever from being on like the second or third story, I forget. Probably second story. And she's now hanging from the rafters, effectively. You know, screaming her head off, as you're wont to do. And then Daniel's maw comes, bites down her hand, and he drags her back into the room and he rips her apart.
Nice.
What Arradin and Andy here, or Gerard here, is a howl that goes deep and strongly into the night. Now, funnily enough, Gerard's first instinct was, yo, Brian, can I beat this thing up? And Andy took a very particular talent that nobody has yet to take up to this point because, well, I'm not a giant fan of metagaming, and effectively this is metagaming the talent. Effectively, let me see if I can pull this up here real quick. Ah, yes, here it is. Uncommon Sense, a miscellaneous talent. The player in possession of this talent may ask the Game Master a specific question. The Game Master decides whether or not they will answer the question with respect to the current chronicle being played. For example, no story spoilers will be given, but the player could inquire as to what the best way to try solving a puzzle or dispute might be. 1 use per arc. Character creation only. So you're kind of all in when you take this talent. So the question he asks, and I believe it was like 2 or 3 uses per arc at the time, and it's been reduced to 1. Not that he ever uses it more than once, I believe. But anyway, what ends up happening is asks, like, could I beat this thing in martial combat? Now remember what Brian says to him. He says, Andy, this thing eclipses your strength by a factor of 5. This thing eclipses your agility by a factor of 2, and it eclipses your fight by a factor of 3. Why fighting a werewolf, as Arradin has plainly said this to be, is more than likely not in your best interest. And then Andy just says, oh, that's fair enough. Alright, into the sewers we go! And they hid out in the sewers for the night. Which did very, very comfortable things for Arradin's shoulder infection, let me tell you. So that's where my first character died. And effectively, after going apeshit with his werewolf character, Daniel decided that, well, he's just going to give up on that character.
Wait, so he basically killed y'all's characters.
Yep.
Only to then promptly abandon said character.
He killed my character, not Andy or Dan or Debo.
What a fucking dick.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is that I end up rolling an empowered priest with one of the most heinous flaws in the game. And Daniel rolls up a warlock. The most heinous flaw that I reference, of course, is Adventurer's Madness. If you don't know what Adventurer's Madness is, it's effectively becoming a D&D character in a world where the monsters are most decidedly not on your level or balanced. There are only 2 results of any fight. You win or you die. You cannot flee from any engagement. Adventurer's Madness is effectively played with the trope of the adventurers who will fight to the death for goodness and righteousness or whatever like monetary gain that they want, basically played to a mental sickness. That said, the thing that cements Gerard's reputation for being an asshole comes up very shortly. The next morning comes. Gerard and Arradin poke their head up out of the sewer grate, and they come upon devastation in one of the quarters, where the werewolf had done its hunting, or at least the majority of it. People are dead and maimed everywhere. There's a gigantic line to get into the apothecary. Everything is just gone to absolute nonsense. Their entire wagon's just carrying the leftover viscera of the dead. You know, pleasant things like that. General werewolf attack shenanigans. And they come across a mysterious figure. A man bandaged up as if he'd been through a gigantic fire with most, if not all, of his face burned, as he had bandages everywhere. Effectively going around and what ostensibly looked like giving advice and charity. They didn't run afoul of him, but they did have a short, peaceful chat with him, and then they went their separate ways. After which, for whatever reason, Arradin decided that he needed a bow. I don't know why he thought he needed a bow. This may have been Andy's idea. I don't know. I can't exactly remember. But all I know is that, for whatever reason, Arradin just wanted a lock, stock, and standard just bow. So he goes into the local Fletcher, and the Fletcher looks at him and is like, okay, well, can I get a measure of you so that I can make the bow to your exact specifications? He's like, what? was like, yeah, this man clearly is a man of his trade. He probably wants to make a bow that's right just for you. Now, apparently because Daniel had been bugging Debo constantly for the last few hours with private messages, of which I know very little of other than they were annoying, Debo began degenerating and losing his mind. Not his character, him. Because he starts doing really random and weird stuff. Like, for instance, he's like, "You want to know what I look like? Fine!" And he reveals that his giant tentacle arm, and then the bowyer just looks just like, "Mutant!" And then the weird burned guy walks in, and he offers the bowyer hush money. For whatever reason. He wishes them a good day, and then he effectively leaves the scene.
He effectively fucks off.
Yeah. And then enters my character, Costain Girion, an empowered priest of the goddess Lyriel. He walks up onto the scene just as, for whatever reason, I believe Gerard was No. Hold on. Right. I've met them before this. So my character waltzes in and effectively interposes himself between Arradin and Gerard, basically saying, like, "You look like you're in terrible shape. Would you like me to help you?" They both look at the gigantic line at the apothecary, and then back at my character's like, "Sure, why not?" I effectively go and treat Debo's character after making a very pointed, direct statement to the both of them to not cause a scene, as a terrible tragedy has just befallen the city, and we don't need the attention on us. I sequester myself into a dive bar, essentially, with rooms for rent, and start patching Arradin up. Magically, of course, because magic is always superior to physical healing. Gerard, in the meantime, gets it in his head that he's going to walk into this apothecary, and he's going to suss out whether or not there are werewolf victims or something. He interposes himself between, I believe, an argument between a pleb and a minor noble, who are effectively having a spat. I believe that the reason that he does this is somewhat to quell the unrest that one of them is making. I believe it's the pleb. Basically that... Oh, no, now I remember. The reason that they're having this argument is because the man's wife is currently just lying in bed with no legs due to the recent werewolf attack, having survived, which is unfortunately the worst outcome of werewolf attack because of the virulent nature of the disease, the mystical disease of lycanthropy. And for whatever reason, Gerard just kind of blurts out, "Oh, she'll turn into a werewolf." What? And then the guy effectively starts trying to rail against Gerard and the town as a whole, and basically starts trying to like rally support to start a mob and do goodness knows what. And so Gerard decks him in the face. And by decks him in the face, I mean he rolls a critical success with a gauntlet. And he absolutely caves this guy's face in. It is never directly stated whether or not he died, because no one followed up on it. But within minutes of my character effectively saying, "Yeah, don't cause a scene," he's arrested by the local guard. Me and Debo come across this, and they're like, "I believe I did just mention that he shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't he? Or am I forgetting something?" It is at this point, I believe, or slightly previously, that Debo and Daniel's character meet, because for whatever reason, only specific sects of the Almighty's Church and other mages have the ability to quote-unquote detect whether or not another individual is a mage. So while Arradin is effectively trying to go for like a pail of water from the local well, they effectively have like, I have no other way of describing it other than one of those television scenes where two characters are passing each other and trying to size each other up as they pass each other moment. Both of them completely and utterly aware that the other is a magician of some description. Now, if you thought Daniel's last character was a bit of an oddball, here's the total personality that is not outright injected into him by Brian. He smiles a lot. That's it. That's all we ever got out of the guy. So if I don't really mention him other than what his actions do, that's pretty much why. Moving on from that point, we effectively go back to Dunkirk to relay that we had effectively found a magician, and my character basically outs himself. It's like, yeah, by the way, I'm an empowered priest of Lyriel. This completely floors Dunkirk, as his city is currently in tatters, one of his friends is dead, and I should also probably mention that within like hours of my character passing, they effectively delivered my new, now completely ruined cloak to Dunkirk, and they had a little bit of a bonding moment. And they sent my character, I believe, as opposed to Arradin, alongside effectively, I think, like a regiment of guys to go and effectively arrest Daniel's character. We go and we seize him, and he's surprisingly well adjusted to being taken in for questioning or whatever it is about to happen to him, with a giant smile on his face as he's put in cuffs and dragged back to the manor. It is at this point that Dunkirk makes a bit of boo-boo, as he puts Arradin in charge of not only my character, but Daniel's character. And the first thing he does is he lets Daniel's character off the leash, because Daniel had to go AFK, or for whatever reason.
Oh no.
So, what ended up in the internum is that Brian was playing Daniel's character, and Brian is significantly better at playing a heinous piece of shit mage than Daniel will ever be. So what Daniel's mage does in the internum is he takes his big smiling ass out in the middle of the woods, because they're now effectively trying to hunt somebody down. And so what Daniel's mage does is like, well, I have no ability to track whatsoever, so I'm going to go find somebody who does. So he goes out to the local outskirts in the woods. He finds some poor guy trying to take a squat in the bushes, and he basically says, "Hey, I'm the local lord's patsy or whatever. Come with me." "What? I'm trying to take a shit here." And how this conversation eventually denigrates is like, "Well, you could, or you could come with me before I burn you to death." And then he does like a little cantrip where he puts a fireball in his hand. Thoroughly shitting himself while being unable to shit himself, this man acquiesces and begins following. Which is how he happens upon us in the internum. Because after introducing myself... Oh my god, I just realized how much of the downfall of the story revolves around people having to go to the bathroom. Jesus Christ. Okay, so what happens in the No, this is serious. In the internum of Gerard, Debo's character Arradin, and my character Costain effectively like outing themselves, Daniel's character just kind of like just piecing off into the woods, and my character effectively being told to leave the room because he's not trusted, which is fair enough. Gerard and Debo are essentially put in onto the barest bones of the plot, which is that Dunkirk had been a naughty boy during one of the previous wars, and he'd effectively seized the territory of a bunch of freemen and effectively pawned it off to wealthy merchants, which is how he effectively funded his war effort to beat off the Imperium Divinatus, or at least to hold them at bay. Which is the origin of the gang that we've been dealing with for the better part of most of the campaign. That we are learning this now is unfortunate, and after my character's death, one of the first things that Brian said is, "You guys have no idea what you just lost." because my character was the only person who had any form or ability to communicate effectively with any of the underworld. So he basically like tasks them with trying to find a way of getting rid of these men for king and country and yada yada, hootenanny, and then tasks them with dealing with it. He gives them a cup of wine, and then they make their way outside. It is at this point that I say, out of character, alright, I need to go to the bathroom, be right back. The last things I hear from my headphones as I'm leaving the room are thus: alright guys, is everyone going to be a giant happy party and just be together, or... I come back 15 minutes later, having lost about, maybe, 7 pounds. And I ask where everybody is. Arradin informs me that Daniel's character is gone, and Gerard is somewhere else. I wish I had actually been at a physical table so that I could reach across it to grab him by the toque of his broke dick toga robe and tell him what the fuck he was talking about. After all the bullshit that has just happened, why are we splitting up? Oof. And as he's getting through the incredibly poor explanation of why they're all splitting up, Arradin passes out. The reason that Arradin passes out is because the wine is poisoned. Thankfully, my character, who is an empowered priest, has the ability to detoxify. Unfortunately, because Arradin, in addition to being incredibly zonked out because of the poison, which is effectively like a knockout drug, my character realizes that, wait a minute, how could you have been poisoned? What happened? He relates to me that he, Gerard, and the Lord effectively all had a drink. So I start asking him, where is Gerard? He's like, I don't know. What the fuck do you mean you don't know?
What do you mean you fucked the cat? What?
So what ends up happening is the most Benny Hill series of events I think I've ever had to participate in an RPG. And we've been in Verinar, so that says something.
Yeah.
Where I effectively have to piggyback carry this magician as he casts a spell to try tracking down Gerard, informing the local guard that their sovereign has effectively probably been poisoned, in addition to one of his advisors and one of his newest hirees. The guards effectively leave one poor fuck to watch over the dumb shit that we're doing as Daniel's character comes back with this poor tracker who just wanted to hunt in peace and now desperately needs to poo. To his credit, he tracks exactly where Gerard would have gone due to effectively because the man weighs like a couple 100 pounds and has more than that in gear. To what looks like some local residents. I ask him if he's sure. He's like, yeah, it's here. So can I go shit? And what proceeds is my character effectively finding out how Daniel brought this guy here. And they're just sitting there like, sure, fine. Look, go into that alley over there.
Fuck, he shat himself. What?
He goes into an alley and he does his business. I began pounding on the doors like, by Lyriel, open this door or so help me! And something strange happens. I hear a mother and her child begin screaming inside of the room. And I do quite possibly the stupidest thing that I could have done. I listened to Daniel. Because Daniel had come back by this point. Useless as he was, and now killing Arradin. I believe I should preface this. You see, magicians in times are rough, as we were calling it at the time, or Mars of the Dark World, are afflicted with mage marks, which are essentially like personalized, not even personalized, like the fabric of reality is effectively changing the genetic makeup of your character to do strange stuff. Like a guy who works with fire magic a lot might have their hair be on fire. Or a guy who works with vivomancy, which effectively is like plant nature and like life magic, like might be rooted to the ground if he stays there too long. Or a hydromancer might have the tidal forces of the nearest body of water effectively slowly crawl toward him over the period of time that he stands there. You know, weird, dumb magic shit. What Daniel rolled was heat aura. When a fairly large space around him, Daniel emits, because he is a metagaming and power building piece of shit, depending on his magic level, or his level of his magic stat, which was maximum, he exudes a very, very powerful heat aura that will gradually heat up the area. If you are below a certain strength threshold, this is potentially deadly. Arradin is below this strength threshold. As are the women who are currently within this domicile. So there Arradin is, tired from not really getting any sleep in the sewers last night, being prodded and slapped to tell me where Gerard was, and my only recourse is to listen to Daniel, who's finally, for potentially once in his life, given a maybe feasible piece of advice, or just fucking off. And I listen to Daniel. Because what Daniel does, and he does this in a fairly reasonable manner, is like, well, the only way that we're going to get in there is if you get us in there. Don't you want to save Gerard? I end up melting their door. With acid. I go into the room. I notice the women are decidedly not bound captives of some strange political or criminal organization. I usher them my most sincerest apologies. I drop my coin purse, which is, for whatever reason, shortly followed by Arradin, who has somehow managed to not pass out by this point.
Wait,
and then I leave.
Just to be clear, you don't mean like the, what's it called? The euphemism coin purse. You mean actual coin purse, right?
I mean a sack of coins.
Alright, just double checking.
Yep, I effectively give them all of my money. I give them my most sincere apology, as it doesn't look like anything nefarious is going on in this house, and then I turn around because my character has no criminal savvy. For whatever reason, nobody follows me. Well, I should not say that. For whatever reason, Arradin follows me, but then goes back. Because he wants his money back. And what ends up happening is the most heinous series of events that I think I can possibly describe happening in a tabletop RPG that does not involve weird, creepy sex stuff.
Oof.
So, how I remember this going down is that, for whatever reason, Daniel's character, I don't even know his name. I don't think he introduced himself. And if he did, he probably had a stupid name to begin with. But anyway, Daniel's Warlock and Arradin go back to the scene. The guard that's still there is effectively watching over this woman's house by himself. God bless his soul. And he's not even like a full plate mail wearing guard in some fantasy setting. No, he's just like a guy in a gambeson with a small like rondel shield and a spear. God bless this man. Arradin basically walks up and is like, I want to get my money back. There's like, after all the crimes you just committed, you think you want to like ruin this woman's day even further? And he loses it. Apparently, a combination of all the dumb, heinous shit happening so far, him losing his only money due to a spur-of-the-minute decision, and apparently, more importantly, Daniel's incessant either metagaming or petulant messages over DMs, which I was never privy to. he loses it. He effectively starts going on a tirade about how he's a powerful magician, and he reveals his tentacle arm. And starts going on a tirade about how he's going to ruin him and his line for all of eternity and curse him. And effectively makes an intimidation check. This man, the legend that he is, completely and utterly flabbergasted in the face of this weirdo, just going on a tirade for no particular reason, squares up with his spear and goes to stab Arradin. He jams him in his hip. And then Daniel enters into the house, and he completely conflagrates the poor man.
Ooh.
And for whatever reason, the poor woman and child who she had swaddled in her arms just books it. Completely just exits the scene as this guy is like burning and screaming to his imminent demise. And then they stuff him in the fireplace.
Oof. So, real quick question, because I don't... Either I'm having a stroke or you didn't mention before, but what system is this? What game system is this?
This is a completely homebrew system known as Martyrs of the Dark World at present, but at the time we colloquially referred to it as Times Are Rough the RPG.
Because a lot of the stuff you're describing and whatnot sounded very familiar to the HARP system, if you know it.
I am unaware.
The HARP system, which literally stands for High Adventure Roleplay, was designed to be very easily homebrewable to where you can have more complex nature of things, such as crit tables and whatnot, or keep it simpler, and everything worked more so on a percentage system. So you'd roll D100s rather than D20s. So as you upgraded perks and whatnot, or upgraded various abilities and whatnot, you would get better and better chances of dealing with things. And the other thing it had too as well was that it went into a little bit more specifics about certain traits. Like, you know how like there's a lot of stuff that falls generally under sleight of hand, but there's that confusion of, oh, would this be a sleight of hand or just a dexterity? Or like this breaks it down pretty hard for you so that there's no question of, oh yeah, no, this is exactly that. Because inherently being good at picking locks doesn't mean you're going to be good at sliding cards around and cheating at a game, you know?
Yep, nope, there's none of that. Not in that system, but it's basically, alright, are you good at lock picking? Great, you're good at lock picking. Are you good at sleight of hand? Which is basically parlor tricks and trying to hide stuff? No? Well, then you best not try to pickpocket anybody.
Yeah. But so that's kind of where it boils down to is that, and this is how good of a system HARP is in my opinion. I was able to convert it over to do both Star Wars, and my old GM who had introduced me to the system had made a conversion to a high sci-fi fantasy setting, which I've got some fantastic stories to tell from that as well, but that's for another time.
Fair enough. But yeah, there's like 11 billion skills and Times Are Rough the RPG, which makes it incredibly easy to get stuck with making hyper-specialized characters because there's so many useful skills, and skills you definitely know you'll need later on when you need them. That said, this poor random guard, God rest his soul, is folded in half and stuffed into the fireplace of the woman's apartment. My character, hearing the man's dying screams, turns around and starts wandering back in. I happen upon the scene as they've effectively, I believe, just found a secret entrance that was, for some whatever reason, sequestered away in this woman's house. Because criminal organization, I guess. Unfortunately, how the mechanism works is effectively you have to press 2 separate switches at the same time, which will then open the mechanism, which is the door, and then when they are released, they will sling closed. So how we deal with it is both of them interpose that the only way that they're getting through this mechanism is if I effectively help them deface this woman's house further. Oh yes, additionally, the poor guy's corpse in the fireplace, because that's what moves, also gets folded in half because of the mechanism. This game. Anyway, So I effectively melt my way through their chimney, or at least their false chimney, or whatever this thing was, and we make our way through the hole. Arradin, who has completely lost the plot, decides, under his strange proclivities, to begin throwing. That is to say, we basically ask him, is there any way we can, like, maneuver our way through to find where Gerard is? There is. And he casts it. Unfortunately, he does not cast it on Gerard. He casts it on the strange, bandaged man. The strange bandaged man who'd been going out and in of the Lord's Manor, seemingly of his own volition and whenever he pleased, and had seeming to have caught the ear of Lord Dunkirk himself, becoming almost suspiciously quickly a rather trusted advisor, it would seem. And for whatever reason, because this is like the last spell that he could cast with his level of mana that he still had left, our characters start getting incensed and like, Arradin, why aren't you going anywhere? And so we decide, because Arradin had completely broken down for whatever reason and doubled over in the sewer, that I guess we're resting in the sewer. Where exactly is where I would like to spend the next few hours. And that's when we're attacked by some weird, heinous undead creature. Unfortunately, because of my character's flaw, which is adventurer's madness, I did not leave Daniel to his fate as he is dragged underneath the disgusting sewer water by some strange... I can't even remember what it was. All I know, it was like some undead creature that was haunting the sewers. But suffice to say, it was doing an incredibly good job of maiming the crap out of him before my direct intervention. And despite the complete darkness that we were in, because, well, no one had brought any torches, and the only one who had access to any light is now currently underwater, and fire and water, even sewage water, do not mix. Oh yes, I should also probably add that Daniel's heat aura isn't exactly making being in a sewer any more pleasant. Oh, this game. So, a few rounds of combat pass. Daniel, because his character was a power-built piece of nonsense, which I'm almost assured that he cheated to get the mutation that he had, because he has a specific, one of the very few, that is to say like 3 or 4 of 100 beneficial mutations, regeneration, manages to survive this encounter. He is not festooned. He is ejected from the water by my direct intervention, and I effectively enough fighting this thing in its element and only barely managing to fucking fight it off because of my character's insane mace skill. Nearly dying in this fight, Daniel finally manages to get it in his head that, you know, maybe casting a fire spell on the visible parts of this creature would get it to fuck off or kill it. And he does so. And frick off it does. And my character pulls himself out of the water, a chunk of his shoulder missing, and having an incredibly bad day. He tries calling upon his goddess to help him out. Nothing happens. That's not good, I think to myself. And I think about it. Why would the goddess not be helping me? And I think about it more. And I remember the corpse in the hallway. Or not the hallway. I remember the corpse in the woman's house. And then I begin suspecting that Arradin doesn't have a plan to lead us to where Gerard is at all. But I hold my tongue and I bandage my character as best as I can, which will likely only really get infected realistically, because, swimming in sewage is not good for an open wound. Especially a bite wound from zombies. But eventually, Arradin does get enough quote-unquote rest to the point where he can cast a spell again, and he casts Remembrance Echoes, or whatever it's called, and he leads us right back out of the tunnel. The ghost completely and well given up. My character now has taken both of these individuals for brigands and begins walking through the door. Or not the door, the hole that he effectively made in the wall. The reason that the other two do not go through is because they're very handily aware that there's something happening in the woman's house. After a couple minutes of listening in, we all figure out that there's a small squad of individuals, some of them marked for distinction in not the army necessarily, but for their service in the guard, are effectively taking a statement from the women and their child. They're doing this inside of the house. My character begins waltzing in through the hole, which I can only imagine he must have been quite a sight. Covered in sewage as he is. One of the guards looks at him, just like, "Who are you?" And I point at them and I say, "I am Costain Girion, under the service of your lord and sovereign, and I call upon you to arrest those two," and I point behind me at where I'd come from, "for their dereliction of duty." The other two take this well. About as well as can be expected, as Daniel had pretty much already been priming up a fireball as soon as I started walking through. And taking this to be some form of treachery, because I told them to be arrested, not to be executed, Daniel then hurls the fireball into the room, incinerating everybody. Except for my character. Because at the time, my character, Costain Girion, had a very particular feat at the time, or a talent, as we call them, which was referred to as Lyriel's Aegis. Effectively, if you take enough damage all at once, you're invulnerable for 2 rounds, though not immune to not immune to physics. So if someone hucks you 3 miles, as happened in one of my previous stories, you don't just not get whiplash. But this effectively protects me from being, destroyed by a fireball. The building is now on fire. And because of a miscommunication of how the building looks, my character is out of sight when they look into the room. The reason I had my powers back was because, I guess Lyriel taken close enough an interest in my exploits that she noticed that I was trying to make amends, and, that was the result, I guess. Both of them book it out through the burning house and begin actively metagaming, if I can be perfectly honest. Basically saying, "We look for anybody who's behind us." And they make a check. Both of them fail. My character starts healing up, then buffing, and I start sprinting after them. They eventually, after another couple series of failed checks, because for whatever reason they think that they're being followed, despite there being a giant burning building for other people to be worried about. And they stop into an alleyway. And they say, "Okay, I would like to start holding an action." "Against what?" Brian says. If there's anybody's following us, they could be doing X, Y, or Z. And I'm pretty sure at this point Brian, who'd been very clearly annoyed and peeved at all the near blatant metagaming that had been happening in the game at that point, is like, "Daniel, if you ever made a game in my game again, I'm kicking you out." And I asked, because I had basically been on their tail that whole time, "May I make a charge attack while I'm going around this corner?" He's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll allow it." I whirled around that corner with a glowing mace, and I turned Daniel's ribs into a dog's squeaky toy.
Ooh.
I hit him to such a magnitude that I took him from his full metagamed health pool down to, like, 2 hit points. From full to 2. Unfortunately, I was not two-handing my mace, so another unfortunate relic of that time of Times Are Rough, which has then since been phased out because of how dumb and bullshit it was, contingency goes off. Despite not actively casting it, and despite not really having any way of being prepared for being turned into a dog's squeaky toy and having all the air escape from his lungs, he has 2 separate spells go off because of a talent called Contingency, which only mages could take, which allowed him to spell up a number of spells dependent on his magic modifier. And because his magic modifier was max, he could do 2. And my character goes down and dies screaming. It is at this point that Gerard, who had been missing throughout this entire campaign, comes up through a sewer grate. And for once in his godforsaken life, he fights something. That is to say, he comes out bereft of nearly all of his equipment, or at least all of his melee equipment and his range nonsense. He has his armor, I think, effectively. Or maybe not, I forget. Anyway, he looks relatively tame, and I just escaped from a bandit lair. General affair. He starts asking them where they are. Where my character is. They get a pretty decent bullshit lie, to be fair, and a bullshit roll to go with it. Although whether or not he believes them, they did just cause a giant fire to erupt not too long ago. He takes out a bolt with a very specific metal on it. This metal is referred to as null metal, and let me tell you, it does some really terrible things to mages. He shanks Daniel's character with it, and what the null metal does is it effectively turns off his magical regeneration, which is brought about by a mutation. It reduces his magical attribute by 1 permanently. And it does a lot of damage. It also renders him conscious. Not because of the damage either. Arradin, seeing that Daniel's character is now thoroughly getting his comeuppance, makes good on his escape. Daniel's character now thoroughly captured by Gerard, who then tells us, effectively, what had been happening to him, which was that after he'd been drugged by the wine that Dunkirk had given him, he was captured and dragged away to some other minor boss in the city, who had nothing to do with the main gang that was up to no good in the city. Or not up to no good, but basically making plays in the city. I think it was Willie's gang? Yeah. He's effectively brought before Willie to be interrogated. And he surprises Willie because he says, "I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." And they essentially have a back and forth where Willie effectively explains that they had prepared the null metal bolt specifically to deal with Arradin. The new guy was a completely unforeseen turn of events, but it would probably work on him just as well. And they explained to him that they're probably getting out of the city, probably going to go somewhere in the Imperium. Because there's a whole lot of weird, strange stuff popping off because of Malleus Bale, though they don't specifically mention him, but there's a whole lot of stuff happening because the strange hooded man with bandages everywhere has effectively been, and with startling efficiency really, starting up a cult. The name of this cult is effectively Malleus or the deity so-called, of this cult is effectively just Malleus Bales named backwards. I believe they referred to him as Lob Salim. But that's neither here nor there. These men plan to leave, and they're effectively giving Gerard an out. And a way to, I guess, make things right. This is also, however, where Gerard meets DuPont's. And funnily enough, despite not liking my character, or Arradin's character, DuPont's goes on a perfectly reasonable... How do I describe this? Have either of you seen the movie Saw? Any of them?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna think of how to describe this. Gerard essentially has a front row seat of DuPont's having a all the pieces are coming together moment where he's putting together that he believes that everything is Arradin's fault. He starts going on this tirades, such as, like, the spy master, I never liked him, but he always managed to do his work competently, but then the elf showed up, magical advisor. And then he states that some strange happenings are happening in the city, and everything starts going wrong. All of a sudden, the barn burns down, and he's coming up with crazy excuses about strange, teeth-bedecked demons, and now there's a cult running around here? Oh my god! Arradin's cost everything! So Gerard effectively has a front row seat to this. Me and Debo and Daniel were completely oblivious to this until Andy had actually explained all of this, I believe, or Andy and a combination of him and Brian basically explaining what had happened after the fact. So after having captured Daniel's character, Gerard begins trying to make his way to where he thought Arradin was, and starts making after him. He is intercepted, however, by members of the cult. A large contingent of them, in fact. At least, 8 of them standing directly in his path. And so he basically breaks off and makes, I believe, do something with Daniel's character. And I believe he effectively brings him to Dunkirk to be... Not Dunkirk. He brings him to one of the local guard captains to be imprisoned. And then he meets up with a contact from Willie's to get all of his stuff back, and then he goes to the Bowyer, who gives him just all sorts of neat, cool toys that he'll never use in the campaign, and effectively fucks off from the rest of the story proper. Not really, but that's kind of where his story effectively ends. Except for, an addendum that I'll get into. So both of my characters are dead. Daniel's effectively incapacitated, and Arradin, not knowing where to go, goes back to the second apothecary who patched up my character, who patched up Gottfried. The apothecary is all too happy to see him, and then he directs him to go back to the Lord's Manor because the man in white is waiting for him. The man in white being the name of the guy in the bandages. He is led by another procession of cultists up into the manor, which is now absolutely overrun with cultists as opposed to guards. There's much less of all of his knickknacks and his collections about, as it's all been seemingly either moved or sequestered away somewhere, and then he goes to Dunkirk's office, which is empty. Somewhat predictably, after all, Dunkirk also did drink the wine, and he's nowhere to be seen. So, likely smelling quite terribly, and having had just quite enough for the day, he sits in Dunkirk's chair. And then Malleus Bale shows up. He says that he's quite pleased with all the progress that he's managed to make, and asked if he liked his cult. Not that it mattered, as the things that were about to transpire were about to effectively make his stay in the material realm effectively permanent. When Arradin asked what he meant by this, he was met with a DC 40 will save to resist having his soul effectively stolen. He didn't pass, as I'm sure you guessed. And that's kind of why we call it Arradin's Fall. Because of one singular moment in that barn where Arradin kind of just made the entire campaign go tits up. But oh well. And effectively, everyone in that campaign kind of died. I don't know what ended up happening to Daniel's character. The first one. The second one, what ended up happening to him is that he was absolutely overjoyed, as apparently he was somehow his patron. That is to say, he was Malleus Bale's patron, even though that made no sense, and Daniel thought his character was 700 years old, even though everyone told him that would be stupid. And played him nothing like a several hundred-year-old man would be. That said, Daniel gets his just reward. That is to say, he effectively has his soul merged with Arradin. And so now he knows all of Arradin's chronomancy and abjuration spells, but he also got his tentacle arm. And has to fight with him for control. And that character effectively ended his days as a plot device for the next campaign. What ended up happening to Andy's character, as he was effectively the only survivor of this entire shit show, was that he charted off the next boat that he could get the fuck out of there, and then he boarded it, along with my newest character, Franco Jarnett. And if you want, I could cap off this sordid tale with how my character was almost immediately killed there, too.
Almost immediately?
Well, I don't want to spoil anything yet. If you have the time.
Yes, but I need a moment to go to the bathroom.
Sure. Alright, so that is effectively where Lakeshore's story gets the unfortunate reach around. However, how the story kind of ends, because my character, Franco Jarnett, also gets on that boat because I just finished rolling him up, and I'm like, alright, well, and then Brian introduced me at the very tail end of the session. Is like, yeah, you get up onto the boat. And then we ended that session right there. However, the very next session, we are still mid-transit, going through a time saver cove, as it were, trying to effectively get past, or trying to save time, because otherwise it would be several months of travel if we did not go through this specific dangerous strait. Or whatever. I believe the place's name was Siren's Cove or something. Which, predictably, had sirens. That's not what kills my character, or almost kills my character anyway. Because I had essentially set up Franco Jarnett as a character who was pretty much built up to die in the Lakeshore conflict, because he was a fighter character. But now things had taken a turn, and now effectively I had to jigger his backstory a little bit as to why he'd be going to Constantia of all places. So effectively I turned him into a Heptantian who effectively had ties to the place beforehand, and he'd finally be going home. Unfortunately for Franco, one of his unfortunate flaws due to his build, which is to say he had his very specific talent, which gave him more flaws at the time, called Times Are Rough. the talent, which gave him more spendable experience points to divvy out to skills and whatnot. But it gave him like 3 extra flaws. Now I believe it gives you like 1 or 2. Which is still heinous as hell, let me tell you. That said, one of his flaws was... I believe it was star-crossed lovers or something. Let me look. I think I still got his character sheet in here somewhere. Man, this is a lot easier when I specifically had something in my browser called the Graveyard. There it is. Star-crossed. You keep falling in love with the wrong people. You're the common soldier who falls in love with the king's daughter at first sight, or the hero who falls for the villain's daughter without knowing who she is. Failed to check. See quirk. Love at first sight. Love at first sight reads. Love at first sight. Ain't it romantic, Gov? Your character feels a strong, almost supernatural attraction to the next person they lie their eyes upon. Sexual orientation pending. While fairy tales of love at first sight are typically fictitious with storybook endings, real life is generally more cruel to the impulsively amorous. And as it just so happens, as we were approaching Siren's Cove, what did we see but mermaids? And I was trying everything within my power to get my character not to look at the mermaids, but the crew just had to keep egging my character on, and it's like, oh, look at the maids, they're beautiful. And so I finally said, well, Brian, I didn't want to die this early with a character, but I guess this is happening. The fuck are you talking about? I have star-crossed. Oh! Oh, that's bad. Pass your check? I look at them. I fail miserably. Well, Spoon, you are now completely and helplessly in love with these strange half-women, half-fish things. Alright, well, does that make me completely suicidal? No, but you'll do everything in your physical power probably to not be separated from them. Fair enough. I start just bull rushing my way to the jetty to, like, lower one of the paddle boats down. Half the crew just jumps on my character's ass and then ties him to a mast. And that's how Franco almost died. And then in comes Gerard, cementing his reputation for being an asshole by coming up to my character with a sack. I look at him and I say, oh, come on now, this isn't an indignity. Probably right. And he puts it on my head.